All right, let's talk about a few of the skeletal muscles. The muscles of the axial skeleton hold up and move the trunk and the head around. And the stomach muscles also protect the gut. And the stomach muscles form the core, which, when firm, creates a stable base for limbs to transfer forces to and from. And so that's interesting here, especially this muscle right around here, this deep one that goes around. It's called the transverse abdominis. When that contracts, that pushes the stomach content together, and that creates a very stable, firm core, which then the limbs attached to it don't have to be wobbly when they come off, but they are like really strong. And that's what that core is about. And so that's part of what the axial skeletal is helping with. Of significance also are the muscles that counteract gravity and prevent the slouching. And we talked about that when the slouching is the forward motion, the forward rounding of the shoulder, that wheel in the mid back that sort of rounds back versus it not rounding back, and how that just excessively stresses the neck when it's rounded and also the low back. And so when we can prevent that, that'd be great. But we have often a situation where when we look from the side, we visualize muscles that contribute to that poor posture, and they're either too weak or inhibited, not moving, not functioning quite right, elongated a little bit, or they are too tight and they just hold on to dear life, so to speak, sometimes it seems. And we can see that and visualize that with two crosses we have from the side looking. We have an upper cross that's around the shoulder, and we have a lower cross that's around the hip area. When we look a little bit more in detail, in the upper cross, the chest muscle and the back of the neck muscles are extra tight, and the deep front neck muscles and the upper back muscles are sort of stretched out and a little weakened. In the lower cross, the back muscles and the hip flexors, the ones that pull up the thigh, are extra tight, and the abdominals and the butt muscles, the glutes, are often outstretched a little bit and inhibited. So if we suffer from poor posture or slouch posture, for example, we can look at those muscles and see if we can stretch out the facilitated, the tight ones a little bit, and strengthen the ones that are a little weakened as well. Just a food for thought. All right, let's now get to the extremities. Stay attached to the trunk. The shoulder girdle anchors into the rib cage, and muscle mostly attached to the backside of the shoulder blade, the scapula, and anchor it to the upper spine and the neck. And then in the front, another one comes down and holds it down into the ribs. And lastly, we have one that comes from the underside and attaches it, reach forward onto the rib cage and presses the scapula onto it. And if we look at the muscles right here, we can see the one that comes to the front here. This one here, that's the one in the front. And in the back, oh, let me go down a little bit more. In the back, you see the ones attached to the shoulder blade there and go up to the spine that way. And then the one on the underside that I was talking about, you can really see the attachment here in the shoulder blade behind this front muscle, the pec minor, but you see how these arms here on the side come around and pull the shoulder blade in this way into the rib cage. And that one is the serratus anterior. Again, I'm interested in you understanding. We're not going to, do muscle names in this class. The rotator cuff muscles attach the upper arm and to the scapula. The three of them attach to the backside of the scapula and reach onto a bump of the upper humerus. And you can see that right in here. If we can go here, we can see the backside of the shoulder blade, the scapula. We see how there's a ridge right here, and we see a muscle on top of it, and then we see a muscle on the bottom, and we see a third one reaching in here, and they reach to this bump here on the outside of the arm. You could see that right in here. That's that greater tubercle bump. That's what this is called. Again, I wrote it here. You don't need to be responsible for knowing that, but if you want to feed back to it and look it up later, or interested in it or learned it before, then there it is. On the underside, we also have a muscle that reaches from the rib cage, from the rib facing scapular surface onto a small bump in the front of the humerus. And you can see that right in here, how that's the front side of the shoulder blade facing the rib cage. You can see the ribs right in here. And that smaller bump is right there. And that muscle feeds into this way like that. And all together, what they do is they hold that arm in like that, that arm, hold that arm into the shoulder blade like that, into the scapula. So those are the rotator cuff. Muscles moving the arm around mostly originate in the front and the back of the trunk. And so when we talk, when you say originate, right here, you see that word originate, that means it's a stable bony attachment of the muscle. The other one, when we go to the second paragraph here, because those muscles then cross the shoulder joint and insert into the humerus, the upper humerus. And the word insertion here means it's a movable bony attachment. And so when we look at those muscles, we can see them right in here. We can see the pectoralis major, the big one right there that goes from here and moves into the arm that way and attaches into the humerus. And then on the back side, we have this big muscle down in here that goes all the way here and moves into the arm this way. And so that's the big arm muscle. The one in the front brings it down, the one down and in, and the one in the back brings it down and a little bit out. So that one in here, that's the swimmer's muscle. That's big, big, big in people like Michael Phelps, the big swimmers. Another one reaches from the scapula and the clavicle into the side of the humerus. And that one we can visualize right in here. You can see that right in there. It reaches from the front and then also the back. That's the shoulder blade in the back. And it goes into the side here of the humerus. So that's known as the deltoid muscle. Another really cool muscle that does a lot of this motion to the outside and brings it back to the front, to the outside. So that's a very versatile muscle. Muscles then that bend the elbow attached to the front side of the humerus, and those are known as the brachialis and the biceps brachia. That's the like big muscle, well, used to be big, that bends the elbow, and we can see the biceps right here, that big one right in there, and how it bends the elbow, it brings it upward. And the other one is underneath it, like in it, right in there. And then we have one of them that straightens the elbow back out, and that's found on the back side of the humerus, and that's known as the triceps brachii. Right in here, you see that right in here. The names are actually interesting, the muscle names. Tri means three, ceps means head. So that muscle has three parts to it that we can identify. Biceps with the two heads. So we had two of those. We can actually see them right in here, one and then two. So, but that's a whole different class. But when it comes to muscle names, my advice is just you don't get overwhelmed just when it gets to that. If you have to study that, just slow it down and look at the names and try to understand what does the name mean. Anyway, so these two sets of muscle reach into the proximal forearm, the ulna and the radius, and then again they do move the flexion motion. The muscles in the front and the muscles in the back, they extend the arm. And then from there, we move to the forearm, and the forearm has muscles in the front that bend the wrist and the fingers. And then we have muscles on the backside, and they straighten them back out. So the muscles in the front, they do this motion, they bend the fingers and the wrist, and the muscles on the backside, they straighten that thing out. And when we visualize that here, we have the muscles here in the front side going into the palmar. You can see them here. And most of them start here in the middle. They start here in this middle part of the elbow, the medial epicondyle. And then the other ones, they reach from the backside down. And you can see here the backside of the hand. And then they do this motion, this extension motion. The forearm also twists to bring the palm up and down. And so that's the palm up and the palm down. So that's that twisting motion. And that happens in the forearm right in here between the two bones here. They cross over one another. We call that pronation and supination as a motion. And then the wrist also bends towards the thumb and the pinky. And so that's this direction. So that's when it goes this way a little bit, or it goes this way a little bit. The thumb has muscles that let it touch the pinky, which is great for grasping and manipulating tools. And the thumb is known as the pollex, and the pinky, and it can do that. It opposes it. So that's called the opposable thumbs that we have. And most animals don't have that. We have that. And it's thank the Lord we have that. We can manipulate a whole bunch of stuff, the world, with having that. And this is here, these muscles here, and then also this one have the ability to bring the thumb together with the pinky. All right, let's now talk a little bit about the lower extremities. The pelvic girdle and lower extremities firmly attach by strong joints with extensive stabilizing ligaments to the axial skeleton. And then we have muscles in the back of the pelvis that move the thigh to the back and also a little bit to the side. And those muscles are the gluteus muscles. We can see them right in here, and then we see them a little removed. So you see the deep ones right in here as well. And moving the thigh backwards to the backside, that's called extension. Another thing they make sure though is that the hip stays level when one foot is off the ground. And what that looks like is, let's say we lift this one leg upward and we go up, and then it is the opposite, this side of the muscle that has to attach really firmly to make sure this hip here stays level and doesn't fall down, because we don't get the force coming from underneath when this leg is raised. And so that's really interesting. And when we have weakness in that, then that causes it to drop down. And that will be when we waddle. That's waddling. And that creates excessive motion in the hip and in the structures, and that wears them out faster. And so that creates more weakness then. So that's an interesting clinical thing. Muscles deep in the front of the pelvis and deep also in the front of the spine lift the thigh up, and that's known as flexion. And you can see those muscles right in here. You got the pelvis right in here. You got this iliacus muscle that reaches down and attaches into the thigh, like right in here. And then we have the one deep in the spine that comes also downward and reaches into the inner thigh. And collectively, they're very strong in raising the thigh. But those muscles, and raising the thigh is flexion of the thigh. Those are the hip flexors. Those muscles can develop trigger points with excessive sitting, and then that can refer pain to the back, which, lots of us do that these days. And then the pain referral and the pain referral is right to the back right in here. And here I just put a picture up where you can see the muscle sort of in situ, where you see the other muscles as well. So this is the one that we talked about. And of course, there's a bunch of muscles as well around. We actually did in a previous video talk extensively in the breathing about the diaphragm. That's the diaphragm right in here. So you can see that from underneath. Muscles underneath the glutes turn the foot outward. And those muscles are particularly, especially the piriformis. There's a few other ones as well, but the piriformis is the big one. And you can see the piriformis right here. And that muscle is very interesting because it attaches in the front of the sacrum and also helps it stabilize the spine from side to side and make sure the head is over the hip and is not to the side. And so it kind of comes from the sides, on both sides, and sort of pulls a little bit to make sure that the spine is balanced and is not moving to one side and falling over, so to speak, against gravity. So that muscle is really working hard, actually, if we think about it. And in here, I have it again in situ with the other muscles, where you can see here's that one, that's the piriformis muscle right in here. And we got a few small ones also that help turn that foot outward. But in terms of stabilizing the spine, it's really the piriformis that does that work. Muscles on the side and also the back of the pelvis then also help pull the leg to the outside. And that's the tensor fascia lata, or also known as TFL for short, and the glute maximus. And in terms of pulling the leg to the outside, we can see the tensor fascia lata is attached right in here. And then the glute max comes right from back here. And they both sort of feed into this outside band, that's iliotibial tract or band, that goes and anchors in the outside of the knee. And then when those muscles contract, they can lift that leg to the outside fairly elegantly without having to have sort of something go outside and then pull down to pull it up. So it's an interesting situation because it's a steep angle. So it's not that easy. And then we have inner thigh muscles, and they bring the leg back to the midline. And those are the adductor muscles. And the adduction is the function, the motion. If you go deeper in anatomy, you will learn that. And those are right in here. You can see how they're in the inner thigh, and they go to the pelvis and bring the thigh back to the midline. And those muscles are massive because they stabilize the body from side to side movements as well. And I had a patient who is then became a good famous football NFL star, and he was really known to zigzag through the crowds. He's a small guy. He is still playing, and his adductor muscles are huge, very very strong muscles, very agile. The muscles in the back of the thigh bend the knee, and those in the front straighten it back out. And the ones in the back, you can see them right here. Those are the hamstrings, and the ones in the front, those are the quadricep muscle. And then the calf muscles in the back of the leg strongly anchor them into the heel bone. And those muscles are down in here. We have a superficial gastrocnemius, and you see how that goes into the heel bone. And then deep, we have another one, and that's the soleus. The difference between the two those is that the deeper one goes onto the shin bones and the fibula, and the gastroc, the superficial one, goes all the way up to the femur. And so you really have a lot of anchoring power, moving power as well. Because also, what I didn't write down is those are anti-gravity muscles. So the gastrocnemius and the soleus, and also the quadricep here in the front, and then the glutes in the back. Those are the muscles that push us up against gravity and stand us upright. So those are very important in squatting. So that's something to keep in mind as well. When that injury prevention that I do sometimes, seminar or evaluation, has a squatting in there because it's very important to keep us moving. That's why those are important. And then on the heel bone, the tendon here, that's called the Achilles tendon. It's a really strong tendon. Okay, underneath those muscles are muscles that anchor into the underside of the foot and toes, pushing them down into the ground. And you can see that here on this right picture right in here. These are three muscles that go into the foot here and then underneath the toes, and they push those toes downward. And that's known as plantar flexion, which I remember you plant your foot into the ground like it's a plant. And then an equivalent set are that insert into the upper side of the foot, pull on, and the toes, pull the foot and the toe upward. And you can see those over here. You can see those muscles in the front and how they go into the upper portion, and they bring the toes upward. And that's known as dorsiflexion. Yeah, those kind of weird names down in the foot. On the outside by the fibula is another set of muscles that pull the foot to the outside. They pull the toes up and out, kind of. And what's interesting with those, one of those reaches underneath. You can see it goes from here, and then it goes and reaches underneath the foot and anchors on the inside, the medial side. And that muscle, or that set of muscle, prevents the foot from rolling inward, which is, an ankle sprain. Rolling your ankle does that. And then when we do that, they overstretch and then often are inactivated afterwards. And so that's when the ankle never really kind of feels right. They really sprained it really hard. But those are sort of a few sets of muscles that I wanted to point out just to kind of get a picture of what the skeletal system looks like. Now, again, I'm not going to hold you. I don't need you to memorize these muscle names for this class, but I want you to kind of get an understanding of the function of it all. All right. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you learned something, and see you in the next video.